I did not have to read books to know that the theme of life is conflict and pain. Instinctively, all of my clowning was based on this. My means of contriving comedy plot was simple. It was the process of getting people in and out of trouble, writes Charlie Chaplin in his autobiography. Hello everyone and welcome once again to the mobile vaudeville stage of the Golden Silent Films podcast. This episode is a biographical slice of life, a very specific segment of the life of one of the biggest names in the vast history of filmdom. There is a lot to take in when examining the life of Charlie Chaplin, and when digging into such a broad topic, it is always best to start at the beginning. In this case, the beginning takes our globe-trotting adventure to merry old England. Before we get into the origin story of the Little Tramp, let's give the usual Golden Silent Films podcast social media stamps. As usual, head on over to Golden Silence Cast on Instagram for up-to-date info on this globe-trotting podcast. And for all of you folks on Twitter, just follow at Golden Silence 1 or just search Golden Silence Cast, and we probably are going to pop up for you. All of these screen names and sites will be in the episode description in case you are interested in checking us out. We would love to have you on board for this year-long romp. At both social spaces, you'll get behind-the-scenes pics and info, upcoming episode reveals, and other fun film-related materials. And a new season's worth of fun photos of our Little Tramps, Soda and Gizmo. Also, if you are out there across this vast globe listening to this program on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, do leave a review, a rating, or both. Our show is now in its 4th season, and we only have 11 reviews on iTunes. We would love to see that number grow, and you amazing film fanatics out there can make it happen. All of those ratings and reviews help so very much. Live your best review-leaving life and help our show grow and reach fellow silent film fans across the globe. Whether getting us more exposure in the world of podcasts or letting us know how we can improve, we appreciate the feedback and always want to bring you the best show possible. And as always, do subscribe to the Golden Silent Films podcast. While our output can be a bit iffy at times, when you are subscribed, you will never miss an episode. The moment new content drops, it will travel straight to your listening device of choice. We are roaming the silent cinematic world and don't want you to miss a second of the action. Now, as we head on into the episode proper, a little backstory. Way back in November, we were breaking down the schedule of topics and episodes and breaking down exactly how this world tour season was going to work. We had a lot of tourist stops set out ahead of time, but we left some open-ended dates for any out-of-left-field episodes that may come our way. Unexpected and unplanned episode topics have been a hallmark of the first 3 seasons of this show. Now, that amount of uncertainty really kept us on our toes, but also filled us with no small amount of anxiety. I have to admit, it's kind of a nice feeling having this current season all plotted out, but it wouldn't be the Golden Silent Films podcast without some seat of the pants flying. And this episode is our first unexpected but super interesting travel detour, a detour that takes us to merry old England and the childhood of Charlie Chaplin. Now, this episode also serves as an odd but perfect entry point into the early life of the Tramp, at least timeline-wise. Now, a few weeks ago, I was contacted by Wendy, host of the Silver Screen Time Machine podcast, which you should all be listening to out there. It's a fantastic classic film podcast with great hosts and great topics. It's a really fun show, so do give it a listen. That's Silver Screen Time Machine podcast. And Wendy, who hosts that and is also the head of the Pittsburgh Classic Movie Club, contacted me about doing a live introduction to a film screening. This would be the second live intro to a silent she has asked me to be a part of, with the first being for the Valentino classic Blood and Sand. Now, the second live speaking gig would be an introduction to the legendary Charlie Chaplin film City Lights. And it was a really cool, quasi-full-circle event since my first ever viewing of City Lights came at a Pittsburgh Classic Movie Club event in 2023. Despite my fear of public speaking, I could not say no. Now, getting to experience this film again in this capacity, it really inspired me to dive deeper into Chaplin and his life. And since he was born and raised in England, it was the perfect tie-in to our current worldwide globe-trotting silent film adventures. As always, a big, huge thank you goes out to Wendy for having the faith in me to be a part of many of her classic film ventures. If you love classic films, both silent and sound, do give Silver Screen Time Machine podcast a listen and subscribe. You may even hear yours truly make a guest appearance from time to time. And if you are in the Pittsburgh area, follow the Pittsburgh Classic Movie Club for great screenings and some of the coolest venues the Steel City has to offer. Speaking of cool venues, let's talk about where we travel to see this film and inspiration for this episode. Now, the Andrew Carnegie Free Library and Music Hall is a public library and music hall located at 300 Beechwood Avenue in Carnegie, Pennsylvania. Like the tons of other Carnegie libraries, the construction of this one was funded by the industrialist Andrew Carnegie. The building opened in 1901 and has been recognized as a historic landmark and appears on the list of Pittsburgh History and Landmarks Foundation Historic Landmarks and the National Register of Historic Places. So, with that little bit of Pittsburgh information out of the way, that concludes the lead-in to this episode and mini travelogue. So, how about we take and turn our attention across the pond to the earliest years of one of the biggest and funniest names of the silent era. Now, the life of Charlie Chaplin, it's a wild ride. From birth to death, there's always crazy turns, unexpected life changes, and relocations that truly deserve to be committed to paper. Luckily, for us nosy Nellies in the audience, Chaplin wrote a fantastic autobiography for our after-the-fact perusal. For this very specific slice of Chaplin's life, we will be turning to this book quite often. It's a fascinating read, and hearing it from the horse's mouth literally only pulls you in further. If you want to track it down and give it a read, here is the pertinent information. The book is called My Autobiography and was written by Charlie Chaplin and released in 1964. Now, this episode covers young Chaplin, and by young Chaplin, we are talking a little bit before his birth, 1889, till about 1901, to a major event in his life at that point. Now, he is a man, legendary stories, tales, all about him. So it's really tough to do justice in one episode. So for today, like I said, we're covering the first 10, 11 years of his life. And no proper story about Chaplin's life can start without a look at the two people whose union gave birth to the young Chaplin. In this case, the parentage of Chaplin would have a huge impact in his life. In many ways, and for many years, really. Long into adulthood, the memories of his parents would seep into all facets of his life. Whether personally or creatively, you see his early life really in everything he did. I mean, Chaplin's mother especially would be of exceptional influence on the lives of Charlie and his older half-brother, Sidney. Now, Hannah Harriet Pedlingham Hill was born on August 6, 1865 at 11 Camden Street in the London district of Walworth. Her father, Charles Frederick Hill, was a shoemaker. Her mother, Mary Ann Hodges, the daughter of a mercantile clerk, had previously been married to a signwriter who perished in an accident. At the age of 16, Hannah left home to improve her fortunes by becoming an actress. Inspired by Lily Langtry, one of the most successful female performers of the time, she adopted the stage name of Lily Harley, performing as an actress and singer in the music halls. In the mid-1880s, Hannah Hill was making a name for herself and picking up gigs left and right. She appeared in Bristol and Dublin in 1885 and in Belfast, Glasgow, Peckham, Aberdeen, and Dundee in 1886. Press notices refer to her as the refined and talented artist Lily Harley, who had been a most brilliant hit at the Gaiety and Star, Glasgow, 4 and 5 turns every night with heaps of flowers. Now, it was during her time on stage that she would meet her future husband, Charles Chaplin Sr. While working in an Irish sketch show in the early 1880s, she fell for her stage partner, Chaplin Sr., attracted by his charm and good looks. Whilst there were some sparks, Hannah did not fully swipe right at the time. In about 1883, at roughly 18 years old, she became involved with a Sidney Hawkes, who reportedly took her to the South African gold mining district of Witwatersrand. In 1884, pregnant by Hawkes, but with the relationship over, she returned to London, where she again lived together with Charles Chaplin. In 1885, she gave birth to Sidney, Hawkes' son, and soon returned to stage, performing at the Royal Music Hall in the northern French city of Le Havre. Now, a certain air of mystery surrounds Mr. Sidney Hawkes. Much of his backstory consists of unsubstantiated rumor and innuendo. Was he a rich heir to a mining fortune? Did the two ever even go to South Africa? Who was Sidney Hawkes really? The questions will likely never be fully answered and for now have been lost to the sands of time for the most part. So with a little bit introduction to Hannah done, let's take our turn now with the father in this story, Charles Chaplin. Now, the elder Chaplin, Charles Spencer Chaplin Sr., not at the time, but he would eventually become senior, was born on March 18, 1863, in Marylebone, London. He was the third child of a Spencer Chaplin and Ellen Elizabeth Smith. Chaplin's father was a butcher who raised his children in a working-class upbringing. Although there was no history of performing in his family, Chaplin was drawn to the music hall industry, which was thriving at that time in 1880s South London. Now, Charlie Chaplin biographer David Robinson writes, "At first he worked as a mimic, but soon developed into what was called a dramatic and descriptive singer, exerting a strong attraction upon his audiences. Chaplin described him as a quiet, brooding man with dark eyes and said that Hannah thought he looked like Napoleon. The traits that appear on the sheet music of his song successes show him with dark eyes that seem somewhat melancholy, despite the broad prop grin." In June of 1885, our story of two lovers starts officially intertwining again. At the age of 22, he married the then 19-year-old Hannah Hill. At this point, Sidney John, Hannah's first child, was 3 months old when the two married. In post-union, Sidney was given Chaplin's surname. On April 16, 1889, the reason you're all here, Chaplin's biological son, Charles Spencer Jr., known as Charlie, was born. Despite the magic of birth, according to Charlie Chaplin, their marriage was not long for this world. Chaplin writes, "What other facts besides drink were involved, I do not know. But a year after my birth, my parents separated. Mother did not seek alimony. Being a star in her own right, earning £25 a week, she was able to support herself and her children. Only when ill fortune befell her did she seek relief. Otherwise, she would never have taken legal steps." And that's a little bit of foreshadowing. We will get in to that ill fortune that befell Hannah. But for now, let's talk about more mysteries surrounding the birth of Charlie. Though this time the unknowns are more of a bureaucratic nature. Paperwork and such, if you will. Author Milton Joyce, in his biography Tramp, The Life of Charlie Chaplin, we read, "Charlie was told that he was born in East Lane in the Walworth district, the same street where his grandfather Hill had worked at a shoemaking trade. Although the birth of Sidney John, who was illegitimate, had been properly registered, followed by his baptism into the Church of England, his half-brother Charlie came into the world unrecorded and unblessed. There was, however, a brief announcement of his arrival in a trade paper, The Era." Now, let's let Chaplin himself look back at his birth and early life. Chaplin writes, "I was born on April 16, 1889 at 8 o'clock at night in East Lane, Walworth. It was still the London of Dickens. My childhood was sad, but now I remember it with nostalgia, like a dream. Buying lamp oil from two old ladies in a shack because it was a farthing cheaper. Falling into the Thames and being rescued by a big black retriever dog. Going up to Piccadilly where every doorway seemed to lead to something charming." Now, on the relationship front, Chaplin Sr. and Hannah were separated by 1891 and remained legally married until his death. Now, during that time, Chaplin Sr. toured America in the summer of 1890, including extended engagements at the Union Square Theater in New York City. Although he never reached the height of some of his fellow stars of the stage, Chaplin was successful enough to have his name and portrait printed on the cover of sheet music for songs with which he was associated. Looking at some of those ads and sheet music featuring the elder Chaplin, you can see he looks like a real charmer. In Chaplin's My Life in Pictures book, you see his father looking quite dapper, advertising such hits as "Hey, Boys," and "We, Trey Bong," or "My Pal Jones." A couple of real bangers, I'm sure. Now, Chaplin Sr.'s peak years were from about 1890 to 1896. By 1897/98, while not shining as bright, he was still enough of a draw to share top billing in the New Empire Palace Theater in Leicester. His engagements began to dwindle around this time with his last known performance going down at the Granville Theater in Walham Green in September of 1900. Like I mentioned earlier, a lot of experiences and moments from early in Charlie Chaplin's life would inspire and contribute to his successes that you may be more familiar with. From mannerisms to characters to comedic situations, there is a lot to mine from his early years. Writer Richard Brody of The New Yorker wrote an article entitled Charlie Chaplin's scandalous life and boundless artistry, and it takes us deeper into one of those inspirations. Brody writes, Charles Chaplin Jr. said of the Tramp, "It was just released whole from somewhere deep within my father. It was really my father's alter ego, the little boy who never grew up, ragged, cold, hungry, but still thumbing his nose at the world. The Tramp," Chaplin also said, "is always quick to do things for his own protection, and he is clever in dodging brickbats and rebuffs of others and sliding adverse conditions off on some other fellow. He does not care who falls, so long as he gets out safe and sound." Chaplin had this incredible beginning, explained Sir Richard Attenborough. Having to commit his mother, living in a poorhouse, his father dying of drink, then living alone because his half-brother was in the Navy, his early life was Dickensian, and it had a major impact on his outlook, his concerns, his appreciations, his fears. He could be phenomenally generous, but he was also very tough with money. He was ruthless in his determination never to be placed in those circumstances again. Benedict Nightingale wrote from an interview with Sir Richard Attenborough in the March 22, 1992 issue of the New York Times. As I mentioned, the relationship between Hannah and Charles was not a good one. The two were married on paper, but in life, both were out living their lives. While on tour, Hannah would meet Leo Dryden. It's the early 1890s, and her marriage back home was a dud, so Hannah stepped outside. She became involved with another music hall performer, Leo Dryden, with whom she performed for a short period. Dryden was known for his emotional and sentimental singing talents. Now, Charlie was 2 years old when the Hannah-Leo relationship started going on. Much like the mysterious Mr. Hawks, this relationship wasn't long for the world and filled with unknowns. Milton Joyce writes, "A good-looking man with blonde hair and pleasant features, Dryden was enjoying the first flush of success. Hannah and Leo Dryden lived together for a year or so, and in August of 1892, she bore him a son. On August 31st, 1892, her third son, Wheeler Dryden, was born, and for the time, the family seems to have lived comfortably in West Square, Southwark. Dryden's legal name was George Wheeler, and the baby was called George Dryden Wheeler, Jr., Joyce writes. By some accounts, there was a second son, Guy Wheeler, of whom little is known. Like her previous relationships, this one would go bad not long after. By spring of 1893, Leo Dryden was gone, and he had taken his son, or sons, with him. Now, young Charlie would be introduced to the entertainment industry very early on. Health issues, mental and physical, would soon take their toll on his mother, Hannah. This would certainly impact her on-stage gigs and start the ball rolling on a life of tumult for the small family. In his autobiography, Chaplin would write, "She had been having trouble with her voice. It was never strong, and the slightest cold brought on laryngitis, which lasted for weeks. But she was obliged to keep working, so that her voice grew progressively worse. She could not rely on it. In the middle of singing, it would crack or suddenly disappear into a whisper, and the audience would laugh and start booing. The worry of it impaired her health and made her a nervous wreck. As a consequence, her theatrical engagements fell off until they were practically nil." Now, Jesse Greenspan recounts the most retold version of the narrative of this first appearance of a young Charlie Chaplin. In an article on History.com, Greenspan writes, "In his autobiography, he described how, at age 5, his mother's voice suddenly failed in front of a crowd of rowdy soldiers. The stage manager, or possibly his father or one of his mother's lovers referred to as father, then ushered him on stage as a replacement. Chaplin first sang a popular song called Jack Jones, prompting the audience to shower him with coins. He purportedly drew big laughs by announcing that he would pick up the money before continuing. More laughter ensued when he began imitating his laryngitis-addled mother." But with that story out of the way, let's turn back to Milton Joyce for a more in-depth analysis of this oft-told origin story. Joyce explains, "During the 1920s, Chaplin told this story to his friend Harry Crocker, recounting that the incident took place at a music hall at Aldershot, where the audience included a large number of soldiers. By the time he came to write his autobiography, however, Hannah's mysterious ailment, which made her stagger as if drunk, had become a case of laryngitis, and father was gone from the story, replaced by an anonymous stage manager who pushed little Charlie before the footlights. In the earlier versions of the anecdote, Hannah is incapacitated, perhaps by alcohol, but still tries to protect her son from exploitation. In the later version, it is Charlie who played the protector's role, taking Hannah's place on stage and winning over a hostile, jeering audience. By 1896, Charlie and Sidney were admitted to a workhouse. This was a dark time for the brothers and really tested their mettle. As a family, the three of them were destitute and in need of assistance. To pile on to the ill health and finances of Hannah, Charles Sr. was being difficult in his payment of child support. Now, the elder Chaplin was contacted by authorities to whom he stated that he would be willing to care for Charlie, but not Sidney. The Board of Guardians, however, decided it was best to keep the brothers together, but ruled that Chaplin was legally responsible for both boys and ordered that he pay 15 shillings a week toward their joint maintenance. Continuing his unreliable dad behavior, he did not pay any of this sum. After a year of failure to support, a Southwark council issued an arrest warrant on Chaplin for neglecting to maintain his children. The arrest was avoided, though, when Chaplin's brother provided the back payment. Now, the two Chaplin children would soon find themselves on a demoralizing tour of some of the worst workhouses London had to offer. With an often sick mother and a father slow on the child support payments, Charlie and Sidney were stuck between a rock and a hard place. Their first stop came at the gates of the Lambeth Workhouse. In a really interesting website article you can find at the www.cityoflondon.gov.uk, you really see a picture of where the Chaplin brothers faced as they walked into the workhouse for the first time. Now, the article reads, "Although admission to the workhouse was voluntary, it would have been a difficult decision for Hannah to make and an intimidating experience for the brothers. On entry to a workhouse, families were usually placed in a receiving ward and checked by the workhouse medical officer to determine their health and identify any infectious diseases. Inmates would then be washed and issued with workhouse uniform. In addition to this interesting article, the site also has tons and tons of pictures documenting the history of London's many workhouses. Definitely worth a look if you want to get more of the atmosphere of what the two brothers experienced in their childhood. Now, as demoralizing and scary as this moment could be for a child, Charlie and Sidney certainly had a positive outlook on the situation. But that was at first. That positivity quickly turned into sadness. Recalling entering Lambeth Workhouse at a later date, then along with his mother, Charlie wrote in his autobiography, "Although we were aware of the shame of going to the workhouse, when Mother told us about it, both Sidney and I thought it adventurous and a change from living in one stuffy room. But on that doleful day, I didn't realize what was happening until we actually entered the workhouse gate. Then the forlorn bewilderment of it struck me. For there we were made to separate, Mother going in one direction to the women's ward, and we in another to the children's." Now, looking at pictures from Chaplin's books and online, it really drives home how terrible life living in a workhouse could be for anyone, let alone children. Granted, it was possibly better than the poverty-stricken alternative of living on the streets or worse. I mean, Charlie did get some sort of education whilst housed in these facilities. It's hard to see how anyone, man, woman, or child, could stay positive in this sort of environment. Just looking at these places through the lens of design and aesthetics will put you in a pretty sour mood. Emotional positivity zones they were not. In photos from Chaplin's My Life in Pictures book, you really see the imposing nature of both the Hanwell Orphanage and the Lambeth Workhouse. Hanwell looks like, a big English cottage surrounded by a pretty intense gate system, a system that many prisons actually would be jealous of. If I were to describe Lambeth, I would say it too was incredibly prison-like, but the structure itself was more of a prison than the Hanwell Orphanage, but both of them definitely gave you some really serious prison vibes, which can be really overpowering, I think, for children or people just down on their luck. Now, 3 weeks later, the boys were separated from their mother and transferred to the workhouse at Hanwell in June of 1896. Despite the separation from her children, Hannah still tried her hardest to be part of her kids' lives. A small ray of light in some tough times, if you will. While they were holed up at Hanwell, Hannah would arrange for temporary visits from her kids who would see her at Lambeth for short periods. Now, the two kids would be at Hanwell for almost a year. This would be an incredibly formative year for the young Charlie. One big reason was his introduction to school. Previously, he was under 7 years old and thus not privy to learning. At the age of 7, he moved up from the infants department to the boys department. At this point, Charlie was 7 and Sidney was 11. Although at Hanwell we were well looked after, it was a forlorn existence. Sadness was in the air, Chaplin would later say. While it was a pretty sad existence, at least the children were provided for. Joyce writes, "At the time the Chaplin boys entered the system, these public orphanages were well managed. The clothing issued to the children may have been drab, but it was warm and well made. The boys and girls received regular medical and dental checkups, thus enjoying better health than the average working-class youngster. In addition to all that, the children were given shoe inspections for footwear in need of repair and regular meals. In addition to all of that, classroom time covered academic and vocational subjects and could be seen as better than average grammar school on the outside world." Now, Charlie and Sidney were readmitted to a workhouse in July of 1898, at which time the Board of Guardians tried to locate their father. They tracked him down in September, and the boys were discharged and put into the elder Chaplin's care. To say Charlie Sr. was an absentee father would be an understatement. Charlie at this point in his life only remembered seeing his father twice, once on stage and once when he passed him on the street in Kennington. Now, a mental health issue on Hannah's part would forcefully reunite the children with their father. Sidney was the first to get the bad news. Chaplin would write, "One day, while Sidney was playing football, 2 nurses called him out of the game and told him that mother had gone insane and had been sent to Cane Hill Lunatic Asylum. When Sidney heard the news, he showed no reaction, but went back and continued playing football. But after the game, he stole away and wept by himself." Things weren't any easier when young Charlie heard the news either. He didn't cry, but a sense of despair came over him. He started to come to the worst conclusions. The boy felt his mother deliberately did this to escape him and his brother. This is pretty common when you see children that blame themselves for matters way above their pay grade and way beyond them. For divorces, for various parental issues, children tend to take it upon themselves. And Charlie was no different. He felt she deserted them. He would write, "I had visions of her looking pathetically at me, drifting into a void." The incapacitation of Hannah forced the courts to step in and turn custody of the boys over to their father. With his father such a mysterious stranger in Charlie's life, the idea of living with him carried with it an air of excitement, but that feeling was short-lived. Papa Chaplin's partner at the time, Louise, was not fully on board with this change in domestic circumstances. Chaplin would write, "Our reception was not an enthusiastic one, and no wonder. Sidney and I had been suddenly thrust upon her, and moreover, we were the offspring of father's estranged wife." So, despite being in their father's care legally, it would be Louise and her 4-year-old son who would spend the most time with the boys. This was because Senior was a heavy alcoholic and a traveling actor who was rarely at home. This was a terrible turn of luck for Charlie and Sidney. Louise was incredibly cruel to the children. You see, Louise was really, according to Charlie Chaplin, a really loathsome individual, especially to the older Sidney. The abuse was verbal and physical, and to compound matters, Charlie's father was regularly unavailable and out of town. Things were pretty dire for the boys during this stretch of time. I mean, it's a bad sign, right, when life at a workhouse is preferable to that of a real home. On weekends, Milton Joyce writes, Charles Sr. often failed to come home from the theater. Then Louise would start drinking too, progressing from morose self-pity to fantasies of revenge. When thoroughly drunk, she would take out her rage on the boys by locking them out of the house. Now, the tumult at home came to a head after a big blowout fight between the elder Charlie, who was drunk, and also drunk Louise. This domestic situation was one that got dangerously physical, leading to a visit to Louise by the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children. This would start the ball rolling on things taking a positive and entertaining turn for the Chaplin boys. Thankfully, their stay in this toxic and abusive household only lasted a few months. A few days after that welfare visit, with father out of town as usual, Louise received a letter saying that Hannah had left the asylum as her health had taken a turn for the positive. She was now fit and ready to reassume custody of the boys. Though he had a sketchy history of child support in the past, Father Chaplin was a whole lot better with his payments and support to Hannah and the kids this time around. Hannah took a room in one of the back streets behind Kennington Cross near Hayward's Pickle Factory. Little known fact about one of the sainted benefactors of the Golden Silent Films podcast, my dad used to work in a pickle factory in California in the 70s. So I'm pretty much, I guess, the same as Charlie Chaplin, right? We can look back at this time and see the theatrical spirit return to Charlie. With his mother back in his life, his interest in theater was again stimulated. She imbued me with the feeling that I had some sort of talent, Chaplin would write. One of the ways she fostered this creativity was taking Charlie to various shows and performances. Seeing the arts live and in person can really light up the imagination and, from time to time, inspire folks to become all-time legends of comedy and silent film. But highbrow live performances weren't the only zones of inspiration. Chaplin would relate this tale of unexpected inspiration in his book when he wrote, "An incident stands out at that period. At the end of our street was a slaughterhouse, and sheep would pass our house on their way to be butchered. I remember one escaped and ran down the street to the amusement of onlookers. Some tried to grab it, and others tripped over themselves. I had giggled with delight at its lambent capering and panic. It seemed so comic. But when it was caught and carried back into the slaughterhouse, the reality of the tragedy came over me, and I ran indoors, screaming and weeping to Mother, 'They're going to kill it! They're going to kill it!' That stark spring afternoon and that comedy chase stayed with me for days, and I wonder if that episode did not establish the premise of my future films, the combination of the tragic and the comic." While we're on the topic of inspiration and stagecraft, that leads us into Charlie's earliest official days entertaining crowds. Despite being in the care and custody of his mother, Chaplin's father offered more than monetary support. Charlie Sr., being the traveling entertainer he was, did have some industry connections. One of those connections was a fellow named Mr. Jackson. Jackson was the point man of a troupe of stage actors and actresses called 8 Lancashire Lads. Getting Hannah on board with her son's showbiz ambitions took a little work. Part of the convincing came from the quality of character of Mr. Jackson, his family, which comprised a good chunk of the troupe, and the company itself. The fact that Charlie got lodgings and £0.50 a week in payment was certainly an economic bonus. Now, Charlie was bright-eyed and bushy-tailed as an 8-year-old when he joined the group of traveling actors. Being at the bottom of the totem pole and an 8-year-old, he was stuck having to sing and clog dance. That, however, was not the child's preferred means of providing entertainment. Chaplin would write, "My first impulse was to do something other than dance. It was to be funny. My ideal was a double act, 2 boys dressed as comedy tramps. I told it to one of the other boys, and we decided to become partners. It became our cherished dream. We would call ourselves Bristol and Chaplin, the millionaire tramps, and we would wear tramp whiskers and big diamond rings. It embraced every aspect of what we thought would be funny and profitable. But alas, it never materialized." Following up on that, Chaplin's time as a youngster in the traveling troupe was chock full of inspirations that would all mix up and blend together as he grew in age and experience. One of those inspirations came when Charlie shared a stage with the famous clown Marceline. This learning moment came at the then newly constructed London Hippodrome. He was also able to learn quite a bit from Zarmo, the comedic tramp juggler. Yes, folks, that Zarmo, the comedic tramp juggler. The entertainment career of the boy to this point had its share of ups and downs. For a short period of time, it would have some literal highs and some painful lows. Young Chaplin was all about experimentation and finding his niche in the showbiz world. One of my favorite stories from Chaplin's autobiography covers his short-lived attempt at an acrobatic career. Chaplin would recount, "So for several mornings, as soon as the theater opened, 1 or 2 of us would practice somersaults with a rope tied around our waists, attached to a pulley, while one of us would hold the rope. I did very well turning somersaults in this fashion until I fell and sprained my thumb. That ended my acrobatic career." Eventually, the future comedy legend's tenure with Mr. Jackson and the 8 Lancashire Lads would start winding down. 3 months before his official dismissal, the troupe appeared at a benefit for Charlie's father, who was now gravely ill. The elder Chaplin was well known and respected by his fellow entertainers, many of whom showed up to perform at this special event. Being a child, Charlie didn't quite understand the extent of his father's sickness. The bottle had finally caught up to the heavy drinking Chaplin Sr. In his autobiography, Chaplin would write, "The night of the benefit, my father appeared on stage, breathing with difficulty, and with painful effort made a speech. I stood at the side of the stage watching him, not realizing that he was a dying man." Like I mentioned a moment ago, Charlie's run with Jackson's troupe was coming to an end. Part of this was due to his concerned mother. When the troupe passes through London, Hannah would get the rare chance to visit with her son. Hannah grew worried since every time she saw her boy, he would look increasingly unhealthy. She would voice her concerns to Jackson, who grew annoyed with what he saw as constant badgering from her. In an effort to distance himself from a troublesome parent, Charlie was, released, I guess you could say, from his entertainment obligations with the 8 Lancashire lads. This turn of fortune would cost the family dearly, sending them back into poverty. My memory of this period goes in and out of focus, Chaplin wrote. The outstanding impression was a quagmire of miserable circumstances. I cannot remember where Sidney was. Being 4 years older, he only occasionally entered my consciousness. He was possibly living with grandfather to relieve mother's penury. We seemed to vacillate from one abode to another, eventually ending up in a small garret at 3 Pawnall Terrace. Now the year is 1899, and life was starting to level out for Charlie and the family. A certain level of financial normalcy had finally been attained. Hannah was making money with sewing gigs, basically working in a sweatshop sewing blouses. Now, don't think she was making too much, mind you. In the mid to late 1800s, sewers earned some of the lowest wages in society. 14-year-old Sidney had just left school for a job at the Strand post office as a telegraph boy. Though the finances of the house improved, they were always on a razor's edge. A life of poverty was always following them, right? Causing anxiety and depression amongst the family. It really was a tenuous way to live, and you can see how Hannah was subject to fits of ill mental health. The direness of things was not lost on the young boy, and they would follow him the rest of his life. This life of poverty and its long-lasting effects are noted by author Francis Wyndham, who would write, "As a child, he suffered the humiliation of extreme poverty. More important, he had to watch his beloved mother suffer it too. He triumphantly survived, but she remained a casualty of social injustice until her death. One result of this circumstance was that he became obsessed by money, which he sees in the simplest of terms, as a protection from misery and nothing else. For him, the possession of wealth is not so much a positive good to be enjoyed as a negative advantage, a shield against the lack of it." No less an authority than Sir Richard Attenborough would chime in on the topic. In an interview with the New York Times ahead of the release of Chaplin, a film he directed that starred Robert Downey Jr., he would write, "Chaplin had this incredible beginning, having to commit his mother, living in a poorhouse, his father dying of drink, and then living alone because his half-brother was in the Navy. His early life was Dickensian, and it had a major, major impact on his outlook, his concerns, his appreciations, his fears. He could be phenomenally generous, but he was also very tough with money. He was ruthless in his determination to never be placed in those circumstances again." Oh yeah, spoiler alert for the demise of Charles Chaplin Sr. The illness and bad health of Charlie's father would come to a head in the spring of 1901, but not without a bit of unexpected closure between son and father. This twist of fate would appropriately enough happen in a bar. Chaplin writes, "The Three Stags in the Kennington Road was not a place my father frequented. Yet as I passed it one evening, an urge prompted me to peek inside to see if he was there. I opened the saloon door just a few inches, and there he was, sitting in the corner. I was about to leave, but his face lit up, and he beckoned me to him. I was surprised at such a welcome, for he had never been demonstrative. He looked very ill. His eyes were sunken, and his body had swollen to an enormous size. He rested one hand, Napoleon-like, in his waistcoat, as if to ease his difficult breathing. That evening he was most solicitous, inquiring after mother and Sidney, and before I left, he took me in his arms, and for the first time kissed me. That was the last time I saw him alive." And so on that bittersweet note, we will wrap up this episode right here and push pause on the Chaplin life story circa 1901. This will be a pivotal point in the comedian's young entertainment life. The groundwork will be laid for some of his biggest milestones. Like his father, big things on stage were in store for Charles Spencer Chaplin Jr., and like his father, Charlie would soon be making a name for himself in the United States. Now, the full life of such a storied entertainer could hardly be boiled down to a single 10-minute block inside of a larger episode. Charlie Chaplin's life deserves a deeper look, accounting for the good, the bad, and the hilarious. All of us here at the Golden Silent Films podcast hope you'll join us for this continuing life story. As we lay this episode to rest, it is time to find out where your favorite silent film stars and their fathers are laid to rest. This is the segment where we join our favorite cinematic fathers on the other side of the cemetery gates. The history, the art, the celebrity spectacle converge in Where Are They Now? Your guide to paying your respects to the fathers whose children have entertained us so very much. By 1901, Charlie Chaplin Sr. was suffering from cirrhosis of the liver and dropsy. He was taken to St. Thomas's Hospital in Lambeth on April 29th and died on May 9th, 1901. He was only 38 years old. On his death, trade paper The Era wrote, "Our readers will hear with regret, but without surprise, of the death of poor Charles Chaplin, the well-known mimic and music hall comedian. Of late years, poor Chaplin was not fortunate in good engagements we are afraid did not often come his way. He was buried at Tooting on Monday, May 13th at 12:30. The coffin was of polished oak. The expense was borne by Mr. Albert Chaplin from South Africa, the brother of the deceased comedian. Chaplin was penniless at the time of his death, nearly resulting in a pauper's funeral." Milton Joyce explains, "Charlie Sr. had died destitute and estranged from his common-law wife, Louise. The former music hall star was assigned a pauper's grave, but his younger brother Albert, who happened to be visiting from South Africa, did come forward to pay for a proper funeral. Afterward, Charlie recalled, Albert and his family went off to have lunch without bothering to invite Hannah and her son to join them. The funeral took place at Lambeth Cemetery in Tooting on May 13th, 1901. Both Hannah and Charlie, then 12, attended but were not part of the post-service lunch. As I just mentioned, Charlie Sr. was buried at Lambeth Cemetery and Crematorium in Tooting, London Borough of Wandsworth of Greater London, England. And with that, our look at a tiny preteen tramp is concluded. While we say cheerio for now, the excitement of the travel is far from over. We have a lot of great stops coming up and look forward to sharing that adventure with all of you. When we put these episodes together, our intention is to take you all over the world using silent cinema as a vehicle. Whether it's the beautiful movie houses of Pittsburgh or the gloomy workhouses of England, we hope you felt a little bit transported. And rest assured, the next chapter of the Chaplin story will be coming up soon, so stay tuned and subscribed. Did you enjoy the biographical nature and small slice of the Chaplin pie? Whose childhood would you like us to chat about next? Are you listening to this show in another country? If you are, please let us know. We want to hear from you. And we can do all that and more at the various social media spots of the Golden Silent Films podcast. While we are mentioning our social media hangouts, if you have forgotten, we are on Instagram and Twitter, or X. Let us know what you thought of this novel episode. What silent and silent-related movies, past or present, domestic or abroad, do you want us to look at next? Our world of silent movie knowledge and experience is constantly growing, and we need your input for our future episodes here in Season 4 and beyond. You can always find us at Golden Silence Cast on Instagram and at Golden Silence 1 on Twitter. And again, if you listen to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any other podcast outlet that allows it, subscribe, rate, and review. It does a lot for our visibility, and we love hearing your thoughts and ideas. We really, really appreciate all of your incredible support. We just passed the 10,000 mark, and seeing how much you folks are listening only makes us want to make bigger and better episodes. So, with all that being said, thank you to all of you fine listeners for all of your fine listening. And don't forget, the silents are golden, and the vaudeville acts of the early 1900s England, they're just a fad. And if you are still here listening to this episode, we got a fun little bit of news for you. In a fun confluence of podcast life and real life, the Golden Silent Films podcast will be hitting the road and taking the show to the beautiful city of Columbus, Ohio. It is there we will immerse ourselves in the world of classic film like nowhere else. And amongst those classic films, there's going to be a ton of silent movies. We will be attending the entirety of the Columbus Moving Picture Show Convention, May 23rd through the 26th. As we get closer to the con, we will be talking more about it here and on our social media sites. And this is going to be awesome, and we hope to meet some of you great, fine, awesome listeners out there in person. So, see you in Columbus, hopefully.